The mistake that changed everything. The cold metal doors slammed shut behind them. 6 humans stood in the middle of a dimly lit alien prison cell, their hands bound with glowing blue restraints. The guards, tall, scaly Zarnak warriors, watched them with expressions of amusement. To them, these humans were weak, unarmed, and completely helpless. Commander Viral, the warden of the Zarnak high-security prison, stepped forward. His deep purple eyes glowed with confidence as he glared at the prisoners. "You are charged with sabotage against the Zarnak Empire. You will never leave this place." The humans didn't react the way the aliens expected. There was no fear in their eyes, no begging, no resistance. Instead, one of them, Mark Reynolds, a technician with short brown hair and a confident smirk, simply shrugged. "You just made the worst mistake of your lives," he said, his voice calm. The guards laughed. One of them, Officer Trevak, shook his head. "Pathetic," he muttered. "Always so dramatic." Mark exchanged a glance with his team. Beside him, Alina Carter, a systems specialist, gave a small nod. David Lynn, a communications expert, smirked slightly. Ryan, Aisha, and Tom, each one a specialist in engineering, programming, and security, stood relaxed, as if they were waiting for something. The aliens didn't know it yet, but they had just imprisoned the wrong people. The calm before the storm. Outside the prison, high in the sky, Zarnak warships hovered in place, their defenses at full power. The prison was one of the most secure facilities in the galaxy. No one had ever escaped. No one had ever dared to try. Inside the prison, the guards secured the cell and turned to leave. Before they exited, Mark spoke again. "You think we're your prisoners," he said, tilting his head. "But tell me, what happens when the ones you locked up are the ones who control everything?" The guards paused. A faint beep echoed through the room. The control panels on the wall flickered for a second. It was brief, almost unnoticeable, but Officer Trevak saw it. He frowned. A glitch. That was impossible. His fingers hovered over his communicator. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Bah, it's nothing." Mark smiled. It had begun. The first signs of trouble. Commander Viral walked through the dark hallways of the prison, his boots clicking against the smooth floor. He was still thinking about the humans. Their confidence annoyed him. What made them think they could escape? As he entered the control room, a junior officer rushed toward him. The alien's eyes were wide with concern. "Sir, there's a problem." Viral's eyes narrowed. "What kind of problem?" The officer hesitated. "We're experiencing minor disruptions in the system. Small power fluctuations. Nothing serious." Viral growled. "Then why are you wasting my time?" We don't know the cause," the officer admitted. "And the glitches started exactly 5 minutes ago, right after we brought the humans in." Silence filled the room. Viral's mind raced. That was a coincidence. It had to be. Still, something didn't feel right. "Run a full diagnostic," he ordered. "Yes, Commander." As the officer turned back to his station, another flicker ran across the control panels. For a brief second, the entire prison's security system paused. Just a second. Just enough time for someone skilled enough to slip through. The Zarnak High Council's reaction. In the heart of the Zarnak Empire, deep within a massive floating fortress, the Zarnak High Council sat in session. These were the most powerful beings in the Empire, leaders, strategists, and warriors who had conquered dozens of planets. Suddenly, an urgent message came through. The Supreme Chancellor of the Council, an ancient Zarnak with silver scales, read the report. His eyes widened in horror. "Who authorized this?" he demanded. A trembling official stepped forward. "Sir, the prison commander." He arrested them himself. The Chancellor's hands clenched into fists. His voice was low, dangerous. "You imprisoned human technicians. Are you out of your mind?" The room fell silent. One of the council members whispered, Do they even know what they've done? The Zarnak Empire was powerful, yes. Their warships could crush planets. Their warriors were strong. But there was one thing they had learned never to do: never imprison human technicians. Because humans were different. Humans didn't just build things. They controlled them. If a human technician was inside a system, they could take it over. And now, the most dangerous group of humans was inside their most secure prison. The beginning of the end. Back inside the cell, Mark leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His restraints were still glowing blue, but he wasn't worried. "Time?" he asked. Alina checked a tiny implant on her wrist. Right on schedule. Another flicker. Another beep. Mark grinned. They'll figure it out soon. Outside, alarms quietly malfunctioned. Doors unlocked for no reason. Surveillance cameras looped old footage. The humans never tried to fight their way out. They were rewiring the entire prison from the inside. And the Zarnak. They had no idea what was coming. The humans are not afraid. Why? The air inside the high-security Zarnak prison was tense. The guards patrolled the cold, metallic halls, their reptilian eyes scanning every corridor, every locked door. They had captured 6 humans, weak creatures, fragile compared to the Zarnak's mighty warriors. And yet, something felt wrong. Officer Trevak stood outside the human cell, staring through the reinforced glass. The prisoners sat calmly on the metal benches, their expressions unreadable. No panic, no desperation, no fear. Trevak had seen many species cower in this prison before, begging, screaming, trembling. But these humans, they just sat there, relaxed. Mark Reynolds, the leader of the group, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a faint smirk on his lips, like he knew something the guards didn't. Trevak didn't like it. He turned to one of the other guards. "Why aren't they afraid?" he muttered. The other alien shrugged. "Maybe they're too stupid to realize their situation." Trevak wasn't convinced. Something was off. And deep in his gut, he felt something he had never felt before while dealing with prisoners. Unease. A strange glitch. Meanwhile, in the prison's central control room, Commander Verl paced back and forth. He had received 3 separate reports about strange malfunctions in the security system. Doors unlocking on their own. Surveillance cameras looping the wrong footage. Minor power fluctuations. It wasn't enough to cause concern, yet, but it was strange. And it all started right after the humans were brought in. Verl scowled. "I want a full system check," he ordered. "Every door, every lock, every control panel." Now, the technicians nodded and began scanning, their screens filled with lines of alien code as they ran diagnostics. One of the junior officers, a nervous-looking Zarnak named Felka, hesitated before speaking. "Sir, if I may, could it be sabotage?" Verl's eyes narrowed. "You think the humans did this?" Felka gulped. "Well, they are technicians. What if?" Verl cut him off with a laugh. "Impossible. They're locked in a high-security cell. Their hands are bound. They have no tools. They have no way to access our systems." Felka nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. It was just a thought." But deep inside, the young officer still felt uneasy. Because the glitches weren't stopping. Inside the cell, the plan begins. Back in the human cell, Mark checked the tiny implant on his wrist. It was barely visible, a small metallic patch under his skin. It flashed green. Right on schedule. He turned to Alina Carter, the systems specialist. She was already working, her fingers making small movements against her own implant. A simple tap here, a tiny swipe there. It looked like nothing to an observer. But in reality, she was hijacking the prison's internal systems. Ryan, the team's engineer, let out a low chuckle. "They still haven't figured it out." "They will soon," Mark said. "But by then, it'll be too late." Their plan was already in motion. They weren't just escaping. They were taking over. The first real sign of trouble. Back in the control room, a loud alarm blared. Red lights flashed across the screens as the system detected unauthorized access. The technician's face turned pale. "Sir, someone is inside our security network." Vural's eyes widened. "How? Who?" The officer pointed at the screen. "I don't know, sir, but it's coming from inside the prison." Vural's blood ran cold. Inside the prison. That was impossible. The only ones inside were prisoners. And the only new prisoners were the humans. Vural's claws dug into the control panel. "Lock everything down. Now." The technician's fingers flew over the keyboard, inputting override commands. The system responded, but sluggishly, as if something was fighting back. Then, all at once, the entire security grid flickered. For exactly 5 seconds, every door in the prison unlocked. Every single one. The realization hits. Alarms shrieked across the prison as red emergency lights flashed. Officer Trevak's communicator crackled. "All units. Prison systems compromised. All units. COD red." Trevak's eyes shot toward the human cell. The doors were still locked. The humans were still inside. But they were smiling. That's when it hit him. They're not trying to escape. They're testing the system. Like engineers running diagnostics. Like hackers probing weaknesses. Trevak's blood turned to ice. These weren't just prisoners. They were strategists. Problem solvers. And if they had access to the prison systems, they could take control of everything. Panic in the High Council. Far from the prison, inside the floating Zarnak capital, the High Council sat in their grand chamber, watching the security reports come in. The Supreme Chancellor's face was ashen. "The humans," he muttered. "They're inside the system." One of the military advisors slammed a fist against the table. "Shut it down. Cut off the prison from the network." "We can't." A technician stammered. "The humans already bypassed our control." A long, deadly silence filled the room. The Supreme Chancellor exhaled slowly, his eyes filled with something the Zarnak had never felt toward humans before. "Fear. This is why we never imprison human technicians," he whispered. The council watched in horror as new data scrolled across the screen. The humans weren't just hacking the prison. They were rewriting the rules. And the Zarnak. They were no longer in control. Inside the cell, the final piece. Back in the cell, Mark checked his implant one last time. The final security lock had been cracked. The prison belonged to them now. He turned to his team, nodding once. "It's time." With a simple gesture, he activated the next phase of their plan. And across the entire prison, the lights flickered, then turned completely off. For the first time since its creation, the unbreakable Zarnak prison fell into total darkness. The silent invasion begins. Total darkness filled the prison. For a few moments, everything was silent. No alarms, no electronic hum of the security systems, no distant chatter of guards. Just an eerie, unnatural stillness. Then, panic set in. "Report." Commander Vural bellowed from the prison control room, his sharp claws gripping the edge of the command console. No response. The technicians scrambled at their stations, their screens flickering with static. The system was unresponsive. The prison's high-tech energy shields had collapsed. The backup power grid, offline. Every door, every control system, completely dead. "This is impossible," one technician whispered, sweat forming on his scaly forehead. "Even if there was a sabotage attempt, our security should have isolated the breach." Vural's mind raced. The only ones inside the prison were his own guards and the 6 human technicians. That cold feeling returned to his gut. They didn't just break into our systems. They erased our control. The prisoners who weren't prisoners. In the dark, inside their cell, the 6 humans sat calmly. The door to their cell remained locked. For now. A faint blue glow flickered across Mark Reynolds' wrist implant. The simple metallic patch embedded under his skin had done what no physical force could. It had disabled an entire alien prison without firing a single shot. Elena Carter, the systems specialist, whispered, "Phase 1, complete." Ryan chuckled, tapping at his own implant. "And they still think we're prisoners." Tom, the team's strategist, leaned forward. "They're scared." Aisha smirked. "Good. They should be." Mark nodded. "Let's show them what happens when you mess with human engineers." His fingers moved in a quick, precise motion over his implant. Another silent command was sent. Across the entire prison, something shifted. The ghost in the machine. Back in the control room, the technicians stared at their screens in horror. The power flickered back, but not in the way they expected. Instead of restoring control, the system booted up in an entirely new format. Strange symbols ran across the main screen, human code. The prison's entire system had been rewritten. Vural's breathing grew heavy. "Trace the source of the breach," he ordered. A young technician frantically typed commands. The system pushed back. His fingers moved faster. The system moved faster. Sweat dripped down his forehead. "Sir, it's evolving. Every time I try to regain control, it counteracts my commands, like it's anticipating my next move." Vural clenched his fists. "That's impossible. No eye in the galaxy can react that fast." The technician swallowed. "Sir, it's not an eye." Vural's heart pounded. "Then what is it?" The technician's voice was barely a whisper. "It's them." Vural's blood ran cold. The humans weren't hacking the system remotely. They had already rewritten the prison's entire architecture. They weren't breaking out. They were taking over. The first signs of collapse. Inside the dark hallways, the guards panicked. Weapons refused to fire. Door panels flickered and refused to open. The emergency lights cast everything in an eerie red glow. Officer Trivak gripped his communicator. It was dead. His team of 10 Zarnak warriors stood frozen, unsure of what to do. "Stay alert," Trivak growled. "We still control the facility." The lights flickered again. The ground trembled beneath them. Then a sound echoed through the corridors. A whispering hum. Mechanical, yet human. Trivak's eyes widened. "That's..." Suddenly, all security drones turned on. But they weren't responding to the guards. They had new masters. Trivak barely had time to react before the drones shifted position, aiming their weapons at their former allies. Red targeting lasers locked onto every Zarnak warrior in the corridor. A new voice crackled over the intercom. A human voice. Mark's voice. "Stand down, gentlemen. This prison doesn't belong to you anymore." A nightmare in the High Council. Far away, deep inside the Zarnak High Council's command fortress, the Supreme Chancellor and his advisors watched in pure horror as the live feed from the prison came through. One by one, their own security systems turned against them. The Zarnak military leader, General Xorvik, slammed his fists onto the table. "Send reinforcements. They won't make it in time," another official muttered. The Supreme Chancellor exhaled, his golden eyes burning with fear. "We need to cut the humans off. Shut down all access to the planetary network." A technician hesitated. "Sir, they're already inside our planetary systems." Silence. For the first time in centuries, the High Council felt true panic. Back in the prison, the final move. In the cell, Mark glanced at his wrist. The final override sequence had finished. The cell door unlocked. With a quiet hiss, the reinforced steel barrier slid open. The humans stepped out. Elena pulled up the prison schematics on her implant. All exits clear. Tom checked the camera feeds. They're terrified. Mark smirked. "Good. Let's go introduce ourselves." With calm, measured steps, the humans began their walk through the prison. And no one, not a single Zarnak warrior, dared to stop them, because they all knew the truth. The war was already over. And the humans? They had won without firing a single shot. The escape plan, or takeover? The sound of boots against metal echoed through the dimly lit corridors. 6 humans, once prisoners, now walked freely through the most secure Zarnak prison in the galaxy. Not a single guard dared to stop them. The prison's security drones floated silently overhead, their weapons locked onto their former masters. The red glow of emergency lights flickered against the metal walls, casting long, distorted shadows. Mark Reynolds and his team moved with calm confidence, their implants glowing faintly under their sleeves. Every step they took sent a message. They weren't running. They weren't escaping. They were taking control. The guard's breaking point. Officer Trevak stood frozen, his clawed hands gripping his useless weapon. His squad of warriors, the finest guards in the Empire, were now being held hostage by their own security systems. The drones hovered in place, their targeting lasers fixed on the Zarnak soldiers. No commands worked. No override codes functioned. Their own defenses had turned against them. Trevak forced himself to think. The humans had hacked everything. But how? They had been searched. Their hands had been bound. They had no weapons, no tools. So how had they done this? His mind reeled with possibilities, but none of them made sense. A soft sound pulled him from his thoughts. Footsteps. He turned sharply. The humans were coming. The walk of conquest. Mark Reynolds led the way, hands in his pockets, completely at ease. Alina Carter walked beside him, eyes scanning her wrist implant, keeping track of every system still under their control. Rayan, Aisha, Tom, and David followed close behind, whispering quietly as they moved. The Zarnak warriors stiffened at their approach. Humans should not walk this way in a Zarnak prison. Humans should not be so calm. So unbothered. But these were not ordinary humans. They did not fear captivity because they had never been captives in the first place. They had simply waited for the moment when the Zarnak Empire would realize its mistake. You think we fix things? Mark stopped in front of Trevak. The Zarnak officer tensed but didn't move. Mark tilted his head, studying the alien in front of him. You know, he said casually, you never asked what we actually do. Trevak's jaw clenched. Your technicians. Mark grinned. That's what you thought. But you misunderstood. Alina smirked, folding her arms. You assumed we just fixed things. Ryan chuckled. But the truth is, he gestured around the prison. We control things. Trevak felt his throat tighten. That was the difference. Other species needed brute strength, weapons, and armies. Humans. They just needed access. The High Council's desperation. Meanwhile, deep inside the Zarnak High Command Center, alarms blared across every station. The Supreme Chancellor and his advisors stared at the screens, watching in horror. The live footage from the prison showed 6 unarmed humans standing in the middle of the most advanced security facility in the Empire. Yet, they had already won. A high-ranking official slammed his fists against the table. Why don't we just kill them? He roared. The room fell silent. No one answered, because they knew why. Their weapons wouldn't fire. Their drones wouldn't obey. The humans owned their systems now. One of the council members whispered, "What have we done?" The Supreme Chancellor's hands trembled. This wasn't a military invasion. This wasn't an attack. This was a lesson. We need to talk. Back in the prison, Mark leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You made a mistake, he said simply. Trevak swallowed hard. Mark gestured to the now silent security drones. This was a test, to see what happens when you lock up the wrong kind of humans. He stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. This prison, it's yours in name only, but we own it now. Trevak's mind raced. This wasn't just a prison takeover. This was a silent invasion, and the humans had done it without a single weapon. Mark raised a brow. So here's what's gonna happen. A pause. You're going to call your bosses. Another pause. And we're going to have a conversation. Trevak hesitated. And if we refuse? Mark smiled. Then we turned the lights off. Everywhere. Trevak's blood ran cold. They weren't bluffing. They could do it. And suddenly, for the first time in Zarnak history, the prisoners were the ones in charge. The incoming storm. Inside the control room of the Zarnak high-security prison, panic spread like wildfire. The facility, once thought to be impenetrable, unbreakable, undefeatable, was now under human control. The alarms had stopped. The security systems no longer responded to Zarnak commands. The warships circling the planet were receiving strange interference, and 6 human prisoners stood in the corridors, completely free. Commander Verl, the prison warden, watched through the security feed as Mark Reynolds leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression almost bored. With a single gesture, he had turned the entire facility into a weapon. Trevak, one of Verl's most trusted officers, was standing face to face with the human leader. He looked tense, afraid. Verl had never seen a Zarnak warrior afraid before. That's when it hit him. The humans weren't prisoners. They were invaders. Zarnak warships arrive and malfunction. Above the prison, in the dark expanse of space, 3 Zarnak warships moved into position, ready to restore order. The ships were massive, each one equipped with enough firepower to level entire cities. Their captains had received strict orders. Neutralize the human threat. Commander Xaltor, leader of the fleet, watched from the bridge of the ZSS Dominance as his ships locked onto the prison below. A junior officer saluted him. "Sir, orbital strike coordinates set. Just give the command." Xaltor raised his hand, ready to issue the order. Then, everything shut down. The warship's lights flickered. The targeting system went dark. The communication panels glitched. The ship refused to fire. "Report." Xaltor barked. His officers scrambled over their consoles. "Sir, we've lost control of the targeting systems. Our engines are fluctuating." A sudden realization struck Xaltor like a bolt of lightning. The humans. They weren't just inside the prison. They had reached his ships. The junior officer's face paled as he read something on his screen. "Sir, our system is displaying a message." Xaltor turned sharply. "What message?" The officer hesitated before reading aloud. "You imprisoned human technicians. Are you out of your mind?" Silence fell over the bridge. Xaltor's blood ran cold. They weren't fighting an army. They were fighting engineers. Back in the prison. The last warning. Trevak stood frozen as Mark Reynolds took a slow step forward. "You Zarnak think power is about weapons, about brute strength, about who can shout the loudest in a room." Mark gestured toward the now defenseless guards. "But power, real power." He tapped his wrist implant. "It's about control." The lights above them dimmed, then flickered back on. Mark grinned. "And you just handed it to us." Trevak's throat went dry. What do you want?" Mark raised an eyebrow. "Well, first of all, an apology." Trevak's jaw clenched. "You want us to beg?" Mark smirked. "No, I want you to understand. The moment you locked us up, you lost this war. We didn't fight you. We rewrote the battlefield." He took another step forward. "And if we wanted to, we could make sure every single Zarnak system in your empire shuts down. We could turn off your shields, crash your warships, leave your planets in complete darkness." Trevak believed him, because it was already happening. The High Council's last desperate move. Inside the Zarnak High Council chamber, every screen displayed horror. The warships were failing. The prison was completely lost. Entire planetary systems were experiencing strange disruptions. The Supreme Chancellor sat frozen, his eyes locked on the security feed of the prison. He watched as 6 unarmed humans walked freely through what had once been his empire's greatest fortress. A deep, gut-wrenching fear settled in his bones. This was worse than an invasion. This was a demonstration. A warning that if humanity ever truly wanted to, they could tear the Zarnak Empire apart from the inside, without ever needing a fleet. The Chancellor turned to his military advisors. His voice was quiet but firm. "Stand down." Murmurs of protest rippled through the room. "But Supreme Chancellor, stand down." The weight of his words settled over them. They had no choice. If they fought, they would lose everything. The message that changed everything. Inside the prison, Mark's wrist implant flashed. He checked the screen, then turned back to Trevak. "Good news," he said casually. "Your bosses finally used their brains. They're pulling back your warships." Trevak exhaled in disbelief. "Just like that." Mark smiled. "Smart people know when they've lost." Elena leaned in. "And they've lost." Trevak hesitated. "So, what now?" Mark took a step back, stretching his arms. "Well, now we leave." Trevak's eyes narrowed. "You're just walking away?" Mark chuckled. "What else would we do? We've already won." Behind him, his team was already sending their final override commands, clearing the way for their departure. No escape pods needed. No weapons fired. Just pure intelligence, pure strategy, pure human ingenuity. The unbelievable outcome. As Mark and his team approached the prison's main exit, every single Zarnak officer stood aside. Not a single alien dared to move against them. Mark turned one last time. A final word of advice. Trevak looked at him. "What?" Mark smirked. "Never imprison human technicians again." Then, with nothing stopping them, the humans walked out. Moments later, a human transport ship arrived, untouched by the Zarnak defenses, and carried them away. And just like that, the greatest prison break in history ended without a single punch thrown, without a single shot fired, without a single human casualty. Because humans never needed weapons. They were the weapons. The ultimatum: surrender or lose everything. The Zarnak high-security prison stood in eerie silence. The once mighty fortress, built to hold the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy, was now under complete human control. The guards, warriors of the Zarnak Empire, stood helplessly as the 6 human technicians walked freely through the corridors. And in the vast expanse of space above them, Zarnak warships, each capable of obliterating entire civilizations, sat frozen, unable to fire, unable to receive orders, because every single one of them was compromised. Mark Reynolds and his team had done the impossible. They had won a war without ever firing a shot. The High Council's moment of terror. Deep inside the Zarnak capital, in the Grand War Chamber, the High Council watched in stunned silence. The Supreme Chancellor, the most powerful Zarnak in the Empire, sat motionless as his advisors whispered in frantic tones. "The humans, they took everything," one of them muttered. "They hold our prison, our ships, our defense grid," another added. The Supreme Chancellor clenched his fists. "And yet, they are not destroying us." That fact terrified him more than anything else. The humans could have crashed their warships into the planet. They could have shut down the power grids across the Empire. They could have turned the Zarnak Empire into chaos. But they didn't. They simply stood there, waiting. The Supreme Chancellor exhaled slowly. "They want us to listen." He turned to his communication officer. "Open a direct channel." The officer hesitated. "To whom, sir?" The Supreme Chancellor's golden eyes darkened. "To the ones who now control our prison." The transmission that shook an empire. Back in the prison control room, Mark Reynolds sat lazily in the commander's chair, feet propped up on the console. Elena stood beside him, scanning the encrypted data flowing through her wrist implant. Ryan and Aisha were adjusting the prison's defense systems, making sure only their team had access. David and Tom monitored the Zarnak warships, ensuring that any attempt to retake control would fail before it even started. Then, a deep voice echoed through the speakers. Human technicians, this is the Supreme Chancellor of the Zarnak Empire. The room went still. Mark leaned forward, smiling slightly. Took you long enough. There was a pause. Then, the Supreme Chancellor spoke again. What do you want? Mark exhaled, shaking his head. See, that's the funny thing. You think this is about what we want. He stood up, walking toward the main screen. Let's be clear, Chancellor. You lost. We own this prison. We own your warships. We own your defense grid. If we wanted to, we could flip a switch and turn your empire into a dark, powerless wasteland. The Chancellor's voice was quiet. But you haven't. Mark smiled. Exactly. The lesson humanity needed to teach. Elena stepped forward. Let's be honest, Chancellor. You don't respect humans. You think we're weak. That's why you threw us in here without thinking. David added, but humans, we adapt. We learn. We figure things out. Ryan smirked. And we just figured out how to hijack your entire empire in less than a day. The Supreme Chancellor remained silent. Mark crossed his arms. So now that you understand what humans can do, let's talk about what happens next. A long pause. Then, the Chancellor finally spoke. I am listening. The deal of the century. Mark leaned against the console, his voice casual but firm. Here's what's going to happen, he began. 1. You will release every human you have ever captured, detained, or experimented on, immediately. 2. You will agree that no Zarnak officer, no matter how powerful, will ever again imprison a human technician. 3. Mark grinned. You will publicly admit to the galaxy that the Zarnak Empire made a mistake. Gasps filled the High Council chamber. An apology. The proudest empire in the universe, admitting humans outsmarted them. The Supreme Chancellor's voice was low. And if we refuse? Mark's expression didn't change. With a flick of his wrist, he sent a silent command to his team. Across the Zarnak Empire, the lights flickered. Not just in the prison. Not just in the warships. Every single Zarnak-controlled world experienced a moment of darkness. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then, just as quickly, the power returned. Mark smiled at the camera. Consider that a preview of what happens if you say no. Silence. Tension filled the air like a storm waiting to break. Then, after a long pause, the Supreme Chancellor sighed. You win. Victory without violence. Hours later, news spread across the galaxy. The Zarnak Empire officially declared a new law. No human technicians shall ever be imprisoned again. Captured humans across the empire were freed. And for the first time in history, the Zarnak publicly admitted their mistake. It was a victory unlike any other. Not won through war. Not won through violence. Not won through weapons. But through knowledge, intelligence, and pure strategy. Mark and his team walked onto their transport ship, leaving the prison behind. As they stepped aboard, Aisha chuckled. So, does this make us the most dangerous humans in the galaxy? Mark smirked. Nah, we're just engineers. The ship lifted off, disappearing into the stars. And across the universe, one simple message spread like wildfire. Never imprison human technicians. Because the next time, humanity might not be so forgiving. The unbelievable deal. The Zarnak Empire had fallen silent. Not from war. Not from destruction. But from humiliation. 6 unarmed human technicians had walked into the most secure prison in the galaxy and walked out as the victors. No battles were fought. No weapons were fired. No blood was spilled. And yet, in less than 24 hours, humanity had forced an empire to its knees. The aftermath of defeat. In the Zarnak High Council chamber, the Supreme Chancellor stood before a massive screen, staring at the words he never thought he would see. Official ZARNAKANNOVNCE. The imprisonment of human technicians is hereby declared an act of war, effective immediately. All human prisoners in the Zarnak Empire are to be released. Our deepest regrets are extended to the Terran Federation. The Zarnak Empire acknowledges its misjudgment. For the first time in recorded history, the mighty Zarnak had apologized. The High Council sat in stunned silence, their expressions unreadable. One of the senior council members turned to the Supreme Chancellor. "Is this truly necessary?" he asked quietly. The Supreme Chancellor's golden eyes darkened. "You saw what they did." He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "They rewrote our security systems in under an hour. They shut down our warships without stepping foot on them. They sent a warning shot across the entire empire. And they didn't even need weapons to do it." He turned to face his council. "What do you think would happen if we ever made the same mistake again?" The council members exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke, because they all knew the answer. The next time, the humans wouldn't be so merciful. The legend spreads. Back in human space, news of the Zarnak surrender spread like wildfire. The Terran Federation, Earth's governing body, received the official Zarnak apology with barely concealed amusement. A press conference was held on Luna Station, where millions of humans tuned in to watch. A reporter asked Admiral Jonas Pierce, head of Terran Defense, a simple question. "Sir, what is humanity's official response to the Zarnak surrender?" The Admiral smiled slightly. "We accept their apology." Another reporter raised a hand. "What do you make of their new law? That imprisoning human technicians is now considered an act of war." The Admiral chuckled. "I'd say it's a very smart law." Laughter rippled through the press room. But behind the humor, behind the relaxed smiles of Terran officials, was something much more profound. A realization that would change the galaxy forever. The war that never happened had already been won. Back on Earth, a hero's welcome. Mark Reynolds and his team returned to Earth aboard a sleek Terran diplomatic vessel. They stepped onto the landing platform at New Geneva Spaceport, greeted by cheering crowds and blinding camera flashes. Reporters swarmed forward, asking questions all at once. Mark, how did you hack the Zarnak Empire? Elena, what was your strategy? Ryan, do you think the Zarnak are still dangerous? The humans exchanged amused glances. Mark raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "We didn't hack anything," he said simply. Confused murmurs rippled through the reporters. Elena stepped in. "The Zarnak built their systems. We just understood them better than they did." Ryan smirked. "And once we understood them, taking control was just a natural step." The reporters were stunned. Mark shrugged. "We weren't fighting a war. We were just troubleshooting." More laughter from the crowd. A warning to the galaxy. While humanity celebrated, the rest of the galaxy watched in silence. Other alien species, some of whom had long considered humans insignificant, began re-evaluating their views. The Trivanti Consortium, a race of traders and diplomats, immediately updated their treaties with Earth, ensuring no human engineers would ever be detained. The Craxian clans, a warlike species that had once dismissed humans as soft, now avoided direct conflicts with Terran fleets. Even the Vrex Dominion, one of the most aggressive militaristic empires, issued a public statement declaring that they would never interfere with human scientific operations. Across the stars, a single message was passed from empire to empire, whispered in hushed voices: "Never imprison human technicians." The final lesson. Back in a quiet bar on Earth, Mark and his team sat together, finally able to relax. Aisha raised a glass. "To the dumbest mistake the Zarnak Empire ever made." David laughed, clinking his glass against hers. "And to the best troubleshooting job we've ever done." Ryan grinned. "And to the fact that the entire galaxy is now terrified of engineers." Mark smirked, taking a sip of his drink. "We didn't ask to be scary. They just figured out the hard way what happens when you mess with the wrong humans." The team laughed, and for the first time since the mission started, it finally felt at peace. Because they knew the truth. The Zarnak thought they had imprisoned 6 helpless technicians. Instead, they had invited a silent invasion. And now, the galaxy would never forget it. Final scene. A shadow in the dark. Far across the stars, deep within the outer rim of the galaxy, a mysterious figure sat in a darkened chamber, watching a holographic replay of the entire incident. The way the humans had moved. The way they had planned. The way they had won without a fight. A slow, thoughtful smile spread across the figure's lips. A deep voice rumbled in the darkness. Interesting. Then, with a flick of his fingers, he shut the hologram off. Humanity had just made its mark on the galaxy. But in the shadows, something else was watching. And they wouldn't underestimate humans the way the Zarnak did.